Hey, everybody. I'm here today with a dear friend, somebody I call Elizabeth Blesser, also known as Elizabeth Lesser. And let me just read you her bio so you'll have a sense of the magnitude of her achievement. Elizabeth Lesser is a best-selling author and the co-founder of Omega Institute, the renowned conference and retreat center located in Rhinebeck, New York. Elizabeth's first book, The Seeker's Guide, chronicles her years at Omega and distills lessons learned into a potent guide for growth and healing. Her New York Times best-selling book, Broken Open: How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow, has sold almost 500,000 copies and has been translated into 20 languages. Her third book, Marrow: Love, Loss, and What Matters Most, chronicles the journey Elizabeth and her younger sister went through when Elizabeth was the donor for her sister's bone marrow transplant. Her newest book, Cassandra Speaks: When Women Are the Storytellers, The Human Story Changes. I'll just show you that book because it's a fantastic book. Reveals how humanity has outgrown its origin tales and hero myths and empowers women to trust their instincts, find their voice, and tell new guiding stories. Elizabeth co-founded Omega Institute in 1977, a time when a variety of fresh ideas were sprouting in American culture. Since then, the Institute has been at the forefront of holistic education, offering workshops and trainings in integrative medicine, prevention, nutrition and the mind-body connection, meditation and yoga, cross-cultural arts and creativity, ecumenical spirituality, and social change movements like women's empowerment and environmental sustainability. Elizabeth is also the co-founder of Omega's Women's Leadership Center, which grew out of the popular Women in Power conference series featuring women leaders, activists, authors, and artists from around the world. Each year, close to 30,000 people participate in Omega's programs on its campus in Rhinebeck, New York, and at urban and travel sites, and more than 1 million people visit its website for online learning. A student of the Sufi master, Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan, for many years, Elizabeth has also studied with spiritual teachers, healers, psychologists, and philosophers from other traditions. In 2008, she helped Oprah Winfrey produce a 10-week online seminar based on Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. The webinar has been viewed by over 40 million people worldwide. She was a guest on The Oprah Show, a frequent host on Oprah's Soul series, a weekly radio show on SiriusXM, and is one of the Super Soul 100, a collection of 100 leaders who are using their voices and talent to elevate humanity. In 2011, she gave a popular TED Talk called Take the Other to Lunch, a call for civility and understanding as we negotiate our differences as human beings. She gave her second TED Talk in 2016 about the power of truth-telling. Elizabeth attended Barnard College, where she studied literature, and San Francisco State University, where she received a teaching degree. In 2011, she received an honorary doctorate from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Palo Alto, California. Earlier in her career, she was a midwife and birth educator. Today, besides writing and her work at Omega Institute, she lends her time to social and environmental causes and is an avid walker, cook, gardener, friend, mother, grandmother, and homebody. She and her husband live in New York's Hudson River Valley. Whoa.
I'm exhausted.
Well, okay, exhaustion aside, it's a lot in one life, and you're not done yet. So how do you feel when you hear that? And the second part of my question is, how does the way you feel about that, how is that informed or influenced by your gender conditioning and experience? I mean, can you nestle into that and feel a sense of a healthy ego and pride in your achievement? Or is there any resistance or reluctance associated with your gender experience?
No one has ever asked me that question. That is a fantabulous question. Um, how do I feel when listening to that? Well, it's a great question because even as I was listening, I was somatically asking myself that question. You know, like that feeling of like the all the voices in one's head, and one of the biggest voices in my head is my mother, may she rest in peace, saying, "Don't show off." be quiet, be girls don't show off like that, it will make people uncomfortable. So I always have that voice, she's there, and then this other voice, which in my 60s, I am happy to say is stronger than that voice. It's taken me so long for the don't show off, be quiet, good girls, don't flaunt their achievements. They don't even really achieve anything. For that one to be a little more quiet, not all the way, I will never get rid of her, but I've made friends with her. And the other voice, which is like, girl, you did some shit. Good for you. She's prevailing. So, and there's so many stories associated with each of those things you read. It's kind of fascinating listening to it. It's almost like watching a movie about someone else. So I feel a combination of old stories and healed self stories when I listen.
Beautiful. So let me talk about this book. Let me show the cover again to the new book, which came out on my birthday, September 15th, as it turns out. Cassandra Speaks.
I planned it that way.
Of course you didn't. When women are the storytellers, the human story changes. So you had asked me to read this book initially, and I would just want to share my experience of this book a little bit. The first reading of the book, I experienced it, attempted or endeavored to experience it empathically through the eyes of a woman, the eyes of the feminine. And I felt validated, and I felt, empowered, and I felt like somebody was finally stating the obvious that has been forever inobvious. It's almost like so obvious that nobody noticed just how completely these patriarchal stories have permeated our consciousness. And of course, in many ways, in my work around grounded spirituality and calling out patriarchal spirituality in my own very specific way, I was seeing how this languaging of story, how these notions of higher than, rising above, this split between humanness and spirituality is everywhere in the spiritual world, from my perspective. But to see how it's everywhere else was powerful and also liberating feeling through the eyes of a feminine consciousness. And I felt a tiny little part of my masculine consciousness pushing back, like I was being accused of something, like I was being blamed for something, very small part of me. And then I looked it over before our talk today again, and I tried to look at it through the eyes of a more expansive or inclusive male consciousness. And what I felt was actually quite liberated also. So I feel like this book is not just for women, this book is for men too. Because for me, reading it, I felt as though you were letting me finally off the hook in a way. You were calling me out, or calling that part of my consciousness, or that polarized part of my consciousness out. But you were also, in a way, giving me permission to stop having to be that guy.
Mm, interesting.
The part of me that has to be masterful, the part of me that has to be perfectionistic, the part of me that has to split off from my unresolved emotional body in order to keep my eye on the prize and do the protective things that I have to do in the world. So I just want to read something I wrote a little while ago, and maybe just talk a bit about, how we move men, not just women, but men, in the direction of being able to read a book like this and feel liberated by it. Because I don't think we're going to heal the rifts or bridge the gender-ation gap until men get on board in an awakening consciousness too. So let me just read this quick thing. Quote, I moved beyond the limits of my male conditioning because I wanted to live more fully. Not because I felt that there was anything wrong with being a man, but because I wanted to explore and experience a more inclusive way of being. My warrior consciousness granted me access to some paths and processes, but it made others impossible. So tightly held, so energetically and physically armored, I felt like I was serving a lifetime sentence inside my own bones. From deep within my constrained cell at patriarchy prison, I couldn't even begin to clear the emotional debris that I carried since childhood. I couldn't even begin to get to the bottom of the issues that plagued me. I was locked inside my pain, comfortable with anger but not tears, with edginess but not vulnerability. With a too restricted habitual range of emotion, I was frozen in time. I couldn't heal, feel, or grow. And I couldn't even begin to find my sacred purpose because our true path doesn't reveal itself in vigilant places. It reveals itself when we surrender to our feelings and expand our emotional container. It reveals itself when we peel away our armor and connect with our intuition. If I hadn't gone beyond the parameters of my male conditioning, I would never have found my path. If I hadn't allowed myself to become more receptive and heartfelt, I wouldn't have found any peace. We don't embrace our feminine because we disdain our masculinity. We embrace it so that we can live complete lives. Actualization is a whole being experience. We become all that we can be when we embody all that we are. Becoming more gender inclusive is not a step backwards, it's a step towards liberation. Close quote. So does that consciousness feel like the consciousness you want us to move towards? Or does it feel as though it discards too much of the traditional masculine principle?
Well, it reminded me, I'll meet your quote and I'll raise you one. It reminded me
I
of,
love this game.
of the last quote in the introduction to the book. It's very short, but I think I'll read it. When I dream of a better world, I dream of men fearlessly reclaiming words and traits that have been coded feminine, feelings, empathy, communication. I dream of women reclaiming traits that have been coded masculine, ambition, confidence, authority. But what I dream of most is women and men mixing it up, blending it all together, tempering power with wisdom, giving muscle and prestige to love and nurture. That's my dream. I hope this book gives voice to yours and helps you weave the new stories the world is waiting for. So I think what you read, what you wrote, is pretty much could be the back jacket of my book. That is the way I see the world. And going back to what you said about that part of yourself that felt blamed, as I was writing the book, and it was a 4-year writing process, and it was a lifetime preparing for it, I wrestled with the parts of me that wanted to let men off the hook every single second, because it's so ingrained in me not to make men uncomfortable. And then to find a voice that was, in one of the spiritual traditions I've studied, there's a distinction made between real guilt and false guilt. So I can feel guilty about something. It's really not mine to feel guilty about. But there's always kernels in that pool of false guilt, of something that is truly yours to own and heal from and change in the world. And certainly in America right now, I've been making a study of all of these anti-racism books. How to Be an Anti-Racist is my favorite of it. And these are black and brown authors writing to white people about what's our responsibility here. And I have the same exact experience you were saying you had with my book. A small part of me is like, hey, wait a minute. I don't do this in my life. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Listen to his experience here, being a Black American. Listen to it. Feel it. Take it in and answer his call to own it in such a way so that we can all integrate and move forward. So I would hope that Cassandra Speaks could be read by men as a loving invitation for all of us to become whole, and an invitation to men to just see the world through the eyes of women and through the eyes of these old myths, stories, religious parables, movies, literature that tell these stories that have kept women in a box and kept men in a box,
Right.
all of us,
Right.
and needed to be busted open, understood, and rewritten.
Beautiful. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why Cassandra lives at the heart of this book? Maybe the story of Cassandra for those who don't know it?
Sure. Um, I've always loved mythology. I've always loved literature. And I've always, having been raised by a feminist mother, been pissed off, confused, alarmed that so many of the protagonists are always men, and the hero's journey is always described in very masculine terms. And so many of the women, from Eve to Cassandra to Pandora, are the ones who are responsible for all sorts of bad things. So the reason, and I tell the story of Eve and I tell the story of Pandora and
Yep.
many other stories in the book, but the reason I focused on Cassandra is because her story is just so attuned to this moment for women. And Cassandra was a Trojan princess, the most beautiful in the land, as the stories go. P.S. All the stories were told or written by men, which is fine. But stories written by men are about men. So this isn't a story really about women. It's about men and their feelings and relationships to the feminine. But that's the P.S. Back to the story. Um, she was a princess, the daughter of the king of Troy, which was the enemy of Greece. And all the mortal men and all the gods were after Cassandra. And she was wooed by Zeus, the king of the gods, and she was wooed by Apollo, the son of Zeus. And Apollo offered her a gift in the wooing process. He said, I will make you clairvoyant. You will be able to see into the future and tell the future. And she wanted that gift. I mean, I think we'd all like that gift. And she accepted it. And then he said, and the part of the bargain is now you'll have sex with me and you'll be my partner. And she hadn't been aware that was part of the deal. And she said, no. And he was so enraged that he spat in her mouth a curse. And that curse was, you will be clairvoyant, but no one will believe you. You will see everything, you will tell everything, but you will be seen as hysterical, not knowing the truth, conniving, and you will be disbelieved. And she did see everything. She saw the futility of the war between Greece and Troy. She saw the death of all of her family members. She saw the sacking of the city and the burning of Troy. And she would tell it for years, don't do this, do this. No one would listen to her. And eventually she went mad from knowing the truth but not being believed. And I believe that women, we know things in our bones and have for centuries. We know what the world needs. It's not that men don't know, but we know something else,
Yes.
some balancing way to live, to lead, to be, priorities, things other than violence and vengeance as a way of working out problems. We know some stuff, but we've been told that those are soft things. And they're like, go ahead, teach the kids in kindergarten, or, be a nurse, take your caretaking urge and use it in the nice, soft professions. But they don't belong in leadership. They're not heroic. So go back into the house, little lady, and stop complaining and stop catastrophizing. And to me, that is Cassandra's story. We know what we know about ourselves and the world, but we have been disregarded and not listened to at the peril of the world.
The deep dishonoring of the feminine knowing, um, characterizing her as the histrionic.
Yeah.
So I try to go below all of that whole shtick. which is everywhere and has been forever everywhere, and ask myself, from a sociological perspective, in terms of context, and not trying to let the masculine or patriarchy off the hook, but just trying to understand what was going on in their experience. And the way that I make sense of it, and I do it through my own lived experience, I have found that vigilance and vulnerability make very strange bedfellows. So when I need to be vigilant on the battlefield or marketplace of life in order to create a particular reality, protect a particular reality, stay alive in this crazy world with all my poverty consciousness triggers and all the rest of that, it makes perfect sense to me that I would then see the world of deep feeling, the messiness of feeling, both in the feminine, but also when it comes up in me, as something that's absolutely and utterly impossible for me to engage in. It's like if I disconnect from it, I have a shot at staying focused. This whole notion of focus as a cerebral construct, as a masterful perfectionistic construct. When I drop down in open Jeff Dora's box, let's say, or something, it becomes emotive, feeling based. I start to experience waves of surrender and vulnerability. Now, I love deep feeling. I mean, that's probably why I was able to write that piece and write what I write about, because I actually have found great liberation in deep feeling. But I really understand in that armored, vigilant, masculine consciousness, while they needed to see women's feeling-based way of being, which is brilliantly true, more true than anything in the most inclusive sense, as threatening to them. And so I wonder, going forward, what has to happen in the safety in the world on a survivalistic level for men to be able to drop their armor, feel safe enough to drop down into the messiness of the feelings, particularly if they haven't ever really dealt with them, which is often the case, so that we can create this world where we're not living in these polarized experiences of vigilance and vulnerability, ne'er the twain shall meet. Like, what really has to happen? And my worry about climate change is that, apart from climate change, is that it pulls us back into a survivalist way of being, where we're going to go right back to gender polarity. Tough providing men protecting his tribe, and therefore women, somebody, in order to create a hold, somebody has to occupy the world of vulnerable feeling. And instead of us moving forward, as I've been imagining we're doing for the longest time, in the direction of something that's more inclusive. So what has to happen, apart from the consistent development of rule of law and protections for women, to create the environment we need where men can drop into their hearts and live as benevolent warriors rather than moving in the direction of being malevolent in their warriorship?
Well,
It's
first
a
of
big
all,
question.
yeah, it's a huge question. And of course, um, one can get overwhelmed by that question. One can feel despairing and afraid that we're just going to go back. And I'm not despairing or afraid, because the way us really crude human beings learn is like we make progress toward inclusion, beauty, and love. We freak out, we backtrack, but we have a little bit of traction. And I
Right. A
know
little bit of
that
traction.
we have a little bit of traction. Women, people of color, all vulnerable peoples cannot stop can't assume, we're good now. No, it doesn't work like that. Those forces are going to continue to be terrified of vulnerability and inclusion.
They're
So,
survivalists. They're in a
yeah.
survivalist consciousness. Yeah.
So, how to move faster, more broadly, how to really make a change in culture? First of all, patience and big picture, and not getting sucked into it has to all happen now and we haven't
Right.
made progress. We
Right.
have made progress and we will keep making progress. So that's sometimes the question is so overwhelming that you just want to say, like, this is too much, I'm just going to do it
Yeah.
in my own family, whatever. No,
No,
we've
keep
made
keep at
enormous
it.
we've made enormous progress.
Yeah.
So, how might we continue to do even more? Um, well, everyone has a different role, of course, and none are more important than others. Those laws you're talking about, so critical, so freaking important. Keep it up. Everyone who is in elected uh, positions in law, lawyers, so important. We must work on that level, protecting people's rights.
Yeah.
That's not my work, even though I bow to and support that other work. My work, like yours, is in consciousness change. And here's some places I have seen big change in moving away from the binary choice of vigilance and vulnerability. Like, it is not a choice, it can be both. You know, I have a meditation at the end of the book that I call Do No Harm, but Take No Shit. This is a meditation for strengthening your vigilant backbone. We have to be vigilant.
Yeah.
Come on, life here on planet Earth it's not just men and women who've been at odds. It's like nature and humans. I mean, a meteorite could smash into us at any moment. This is not a peaceful little garden we live in. This is a place for strong people. So a strong backbone is so important. But if that's all you have, you're a jerk. I'm sorry. You can have a strong backbone and a soft, loving, open, curious, empathetic heart. You can have them at the same time. The problem has been with the excess of the masculine. We've just been about the vigilant warrior. And so it's not an either or thing. And this is my hope for women coming into power, that we don't just leave the feminine out because we so much want to get in and change the world, and then you get in and you've turned in, you know, Nietzsche says, be careful fighting monsters that you don't turn into one. So this is a critical moment for women to strengthen our backbone and our masculine, but to keep our feminine heart alive and well and validated. So one place I see enormous hope is fatherhood. I have 3 sons, and they're all fathers. And the way they are parenting their children, and the way they are sharing parenting with their mates, it's their wives don't consider what they're doing to be babysitting. They don't like, can you babysit? Can you watch? No, there's an expectation in these women that you're going to parent these kids with me. All the caring and nurture. Look, I'm making as much money as you. Learn it, dude. And these guys are rising to the occasion with so much ability to be vulnerable and care and nurture and be
Beautiful.
patient and be loving. I'm blown away. I'm so hopeful. And I see this happening everywhere. So, you know, there's a joke I love, which is, how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but that light bulb really has to want to change.
That's great.
So women really wanted to change over the past 150 years. We have wanted to change. We've wanted to learn how to be more strategic, more powerful in the business and governmental realms. We've wanted to make money. We've needed to make money. It's been gears grinding in the wrong direction for us. I remember when I first started looking at spreadsheets of the finances at Omega Institute. It hurt. It hurt my head. I had like no training in even being interested in money and budgets, and I had to really work it to train myself to know that it's important. And men now have to want to change as much as women wanted to change. For the next 100 years, men are going to have to want to change as much as women wanted for the past 100 years. Not because they're good and nice, but because it'll be good for them.
Because they're
As
imprisoned.
you said
They're
earlier.
imprisoned. They're imprisoned
They're
in this
imprisoned.
consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah, so I beginning to see men wanting to change, and the whole way people are playing with gender now, gender fluid.
It's great.
It's just like we're
It's great.
playing with the whole idea now. Not that there's no such thing as women and no such thing as men, but we can
It's up
we
for
can
grabs.
help each other. We
Hmm.
can flow and help each other become whole.
Brilliant. So what I hear is 3 steps forward, 2 steps back is still
Yes,
progress. And
always.
change has to be incremental, sustainable, not just rapid fire peak experiency, because we really need it to ground in experience in the body and the culture. But I wonder, when you talk about taking, well, the Trumpian to lunch, I think that was the original context for that, as I recall, or maybe it wasn't, but you started to talk about that after Trump came in. And I was like, I don't think so. This was my first level of interface with that idea. It was like that archaic survivalistic T-Rex digging his heels because he doesn't want to fade out in the face of progression. You can't talk to that person. You can't, we really, survivalism and authenticity don't have a lot in common. But I don't feel that's true now. It may be true that we can't sometimes talk to each other, but I feel like this whole question of how we transform and bridge this generation gap, a lot of it is dependent on our understanding the context for that other consciousness. And I think even more importantly, it's not hard for me to go there if I just tap into my own vigilance, that I stand on the shoulders of a armored survivalist consciousness. That's what built the railroad that crosses Canada and cuts through all these mountains and cut holes in Alberta and through BC. Everything that I see comes from somebody's willingness, including, of course, my family of origin, to put away their feelings, brave on, and accomplish things. So I wonder if there's a way for us to create an interface between these polarized perspectives within gender and beyond gender, where we can start to really hear what another's experiencing. One of the things I liked about Mayor Pete when he was running was he had this way. I mean, Hillary would call them deplorables, and was that sort of feeling that she was better than. He had this way of talking to people where he understood people on the right, and he understood that that consciousness was legitimate, valuable, essential, and got us where we are. Um, so I wonder maybe what your thoughts are on, like, how do we bridge the gap in a grounded and realistic way, which may not mean we can have a good lunch together, but where as I progress, really stay connected in a very grounded and earthly way to where I come from and where we come from as a collective in that very polarized survivalistic
Mm.
consciousness that got us to the moment where you and I can sit here and have this kind of a conversation.
Well, I will answer that, and I just want to ask you something. You said we stand on the shoulders of a certain kind of man who tamed nature and for the safety and the progress of humanity. And you said they put away their feelings, and I I I don't think that's exactly true.
Mhm,
I think they had feelings. They maybe had a different kind of feelings,
mhm,
or they weren't allowed to express those feelings. But I've been married twice, not simultaneously. I was
really,
married, of
not
course. Yeah.
simultaneously, right? Sure.
And I have two men, and I have three sons. And I have learned that just because they don't express their feelings the way I would doesn't mean they don't have feelings.
Right.
So I think it's important not to just make those kind of statements like those guys didn't have any feelings, therefore they were able to innovate and make stuff. Like, actually, they had feelings, and on the other hand, you can make stuff with a lot of feelings. So this
Yeah,
idea that,
right.
yeah, you get what I'm saying. So to go back to your question of I did a TED talk called Take the Other to Lunch. And this was long before Trump came
Uh,
in. I was just sort of noting, being a student of history, and I had always been really fascinated by what happened in Cambodia and Rwanda and Nazi Germany. Like, what were those cultures like before they descended into hell? What was going on there? You know what was going on there? Nothing different than what's going on here. People with different opinions, slowly not being able to talk to each other. And that sort of vigilant warrior culture where you're wrong, I'm right, and got so bad, it devolves into war and genocide. And I began to think, this could happen here. This could happen here. And before it happens, I'm looking at my own self. It's like I am such a hypocrite. I say I'm an inclusive person. I'm very inclusive when it comes to one's sexuality, race, disabled people. Like I'm always looking, how do we include? How do we include more at Omega in our staff, in our teachers? But when somebody has a different opinion, let's say about abortion or the environment, wall,
right.
other. You are other. I don't like you. I don't trust you. I don't
Yeah.
want to talk to you. So I'm like, okay, go where it's hard. Don't go where it's easy. You know, don't go like, oh, I'm going to talk to a lot of my gay friends. I love gay people. I'm like, that's not my edge. My edge is these people who disagree with me politically and environmentally, and when it comes to me being a feminist. And so I started literally taking people to lunch who I disagreed with. And the point wasn't to change each other's mind, the point was to humanize each other and to ask questions like, why do you feel that way? What's happened in your life that makes you feel that way? Could you ever imagine feeling the way I feel?
Mm.
And just getting to know each other so that one day we don't end up watching the other one be carted off to a concentration camp and you don't say anything. You say something because it's like, I fell in love with you at lunch. So it's hard and it's kind of anti-intuitive to take someone you don't like to lunch. But I swear to God, I think it is the only thing that will save us. And like, you are so self-aware. You said at the beginning of our interview, you said, I read your book the first time, there was a small part of me that felt like this, and then the second time, it's like so few people are actually able to step out of defensiveness and admit what's really going on. They don't even know what's going on. Those of us who do, what an honor to take on a job that would help other people open to the other. And to do it in a humble way, not in a, okay, you basket of deplorable person, I'm taking you to lunch and teaching you something.
And
It's more
aren't you
like,
lucky? And aren't you lucky? You get to sit at the table with me.
it's okay, beloved. Us spiritual types, we talk about we are all one.
Mm.
Bullshit. If
Yes.
you can't be one with someone you disagree with, don't ever say that. Like, go to the hard place where you are not one with the other and just play with it. Play and see what can happen.
I think that, if I think on what brought me to this moment, why I left law, what it was feelings, it was following the thread of feelings back to source or back to the core. And my
Nice.
experience of purpose, this very masculinated notion of purpose, was inextricably linked with my somatic structure and my emotional release capacity. So I would get clearer and clearer visions of what my path was, whether it was to write or whether it was to whatever it was. always in the heart of and at the tail end of an emotional release experience. So, because that was the only way that I could clear the armor in my body and have access to my encoded path that lived inside of me. I never found it in my mind. I just bounced back and forth. Like I had a cousin who used to come and ask questions about his path, and I would say, well, how do you feel? And he would say, well, I think. And I'd say, well, that's the whole problem. That's why nothing ever changes, because you won't go down into the terrain of the body and find out how you actually
Mm.
feel about your career, your geography, and your life partner.
Yeah, my husband often says that before he had to be the sole parent of his little boy, he was a single parent after a really hard divorce. And his son was like 4, and he became his sole parent. And he said before that, he only would say, I think. He didn't even know what it meant to say, I feel.
Yeah.
And in the crucible of having to be intimate with another person all the time and listen and learn and expand to include this little being, he began to find his feeling function. But I feel for men because you have to prove your masculinity over and over, which it involves saying I don't feel. And so you had a question. I interrupted your question.
No, I think it's okay. So, um, there's something I wanted to say to you that I want to say to you. You know, my heroic figures in this world, and not to godjectify you, and not to, forget your humanness, but many of my heroic figures in this world are actually women. Um, I'm not so persuaded by the masculine, for all kinds of for obvious reasons. Um, and Omega Institute for me really was my spiritual home. It was the place where I did the most transformative work. I was just about to sign on the dotted line and become a prominent criminal trial lawyer after articling with Ed Greenspan in Canada. And then I backed off. And then I got a little office in a peripheral way just to feel into this journey. And I made a commitment with some guys to do some stuff and come back into it in some autumn. I think it was like 94 or 95. I went to Omega and I did a George Kaufman Rumi workshop. George Kaufman was a lawyer. And that workshop told me that these instincts I had as to encoded path in me that was no longer law were true. And then soon thereafter, I did a Terry Hunt workshop. And I sat at Terry Hunt's emotional healing workshop, and I just thought, what the hell are you doing here with all of these losers? All of these criers, all of these whiners, get me the fuck out of here and back into a courtroom where I can be a focused guy. But some part of me stayed in that building down near the beach. And that Terry Hunt workshop and that holotropic breath work where I saw everyone's stuff and then saw my stuff and realized I couldn't play the law game anymore changed everything. And I came home and I left law and embarked on the journey to do deeper somatic work and then to start writing. And that place that you co-founded, that a woman co-founded, changed my life. And so I see you in very heroic terms, both subjectively and objectively. And I want to thank you for your contribution to this world. Because
Thank you.
it's really real. It's really real.
Thank you. It's really real is a
It's really
beautiful
real.
gift to give to someone, you know?
Really real.
Because man and women, I think we unreal ourselves, you know?
Yeah,
We can't.
it's tangible. So
Mhm.
now when my work helps people, a lot of it traces back to what you
Thank you.
courageously, bravely co-created in the 70s. And
Thank you. I appreciate that. A word you keep using is focus.
mm,
And I love that word. And um, you don't, there's this beautiful quote by a Spanish philosopher, tell me what you pay attention to, and I will tell you who you are. And it's not that focus is not feminine. It's just that we've been focusing on a, a certain aspect of humanness, as if, and so we have conflated the word focus with just what we focus on. But if we focused on, let's say a woman got into an elected position and she could do whatever she wanted, and she felt, I'm going to focus everything, all of our budget, all of our time, all of our work on child care for everyone. Excellent child care, beautiful child care, incredible buildings that are clean and full of wonderful stuff for children so women and men can work and children can be raised well. That's just another thing to focus on
Yeah.
instead of focusing on the railroads, which are important. So focus is both masculine and feminine. It's just what we choose to focus on.
Yeah. So more heartfelt or benevolent focus, maybe, or something. I mean, I think this
Yeah,
dance,
relational,
relational,
relational.
yeah, that's better said. I think this dance between willfulness and surrender, which lives at the heart of the creative process, all of this, it is still about focus. It's just about where are you focusing from.
Exactly.
Yeah, beautiful. So anything else you want to say about this magnificent book that I genuinely encourage people to check this book out, and that includes women and men. I think there's something in it for everybody. Anything else you want to say about this creation?
Um, I like it. I
Feel good?
like
You
my,
feel good about where it arrived?
yeah, she's like a friend, and I feel she'll go out into the world and do her work. And you and I, before we got on, we were saying, how crazy are we? We both now are thinking of writing new books
No, I'm
because,
not.
right,
I'm
yes,
just
you
making
are.
notes. I'm just making notes.
A pamphlet. But yeah, whenever I release a book, I feel like it's a friend gone out into the world. And now it's up to that friend to find its friends and do its thing. And so I feel particularly good about this friend of mine who's going out
Yeah,
into the
nice,
world.
nice, nice. I feel good about her too.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. We'll connect again soon.
All right.